For record-keeping purposes, if you wish to make a statement regarding any item on the agenda, please complete the form located at the entrance or at the rear of the council chambers and deposit it with the Planning and Housing Commission Secretary. Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Planning and Housing Commission meeting. Commissioner Woody will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. Persons wishing to address the Planning and Housing Commission are requested to state their name for the record. This portion of the agenda is intended for public comment. State law prohibits the Planning and Housing Commission from discussing or taking actions on items not listed on the agenda. The Planning and Housing Commission will appreciate your cooperation in keeping your comments brief. Please observe a 3-minute limit to communications. Ms. Capilla, did we receive any speaker cards or written comments from the public for any items not on the agenda?
No, Chair, we did not receive any speaker comments nor written comments. Speaker cards nor written comments, pardon.
Thank you. Our first item is meeting minutes, approval of meeting minutes for the Planning and Housing Commission meeting of May 8th, 2023. Ms. Capilla, did we receive any speaker cards or public written comments regarding the May 8th minutes?
No, Chair, we did not.
Thank you. And do we have a motion from the commission for those minutes?
I motion to approve the minutes from May 8th, 2023.
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a second by Commissioner Woody. Let's please vote. And the minutes do pass. Our first item is a consent item. Consent items are not heard as public hearings. As such, does any commissioner have questions or otherwise wish to pull this item from the consent calendar?
Yeah, I would.
Yes, okay. So as such, we have had a request to pull the item from consent and moving it to public comment. Mr. Eastman, as such, we have GPCD 2023-0001, a request for the city general plan consistency determination of the City of Corona's fiscal year 23-24 capital improvement program. The applicant is City of Corona. Mr. Eastman, our planning manager, will present this item. Mr. Eastman.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Commission. Jay Eastman, Planning Manager. This consent item, which you've pulled, is a review of the city's annual CIP program. To provide some background, every year the City Council reviews a budget for the forthcoming year, and as part of that budget, it includes a list of projects that would be constructed or otherwise implemented throughout the city, the capital improvement program. So these are typically physical construction projects, although in the past it has included some services or other type of programs like planning programs. As part of the review of their budget, as part of their workshops, they do take a look at capital improvement programs, and they do provide a recommendation to staff to move them forward. There was a workshop that the City Council held on April 13th of this year, and they are expected to take this current budget with the CIP program to a meeting on June 21st. So what you have before you is a list of 164 capital projects, CIP projects, for the next fiscal year. Of those projects, the majority of those have already been reviewed by the commission in the past and deemed consistent. The issue here before you today is that the commission's responsibility is to take a look at these projects and determine whether or not these projects are consistent with the general plan. It is a requirement under state law that the commission do this, so this is not an extracurricular activity that we just bring for you for fun. because putting together a list of 162 projects and comparing it to the general plan isn't particularly fun. But that being said, it is required under Government Code Section 65401 that every year the Planning Commission would determine consistency. So staff has gone through the projects that were provided to us from the Finance Department with the brief project description that's been provided. We've taken a look at the project versus the general plan and identified goals and policies that we feel match up to those projects and provided that as a recommendation for you. So you will see in Exhibit 2, which is, I believe, a 22-page table of all 164 projects, our recommendations as to how the project would be conforming. I would also point out that we have highlighted the table and provided a column on consistency status as to whether or not the project is new, something you haven't reviewed before, or if it's something that you've previously reviewed and determined consistent in prior years. And so what has happened is many cases these projects are multi-year projects, so they are included in the CIP year after year until they're finally constructed. Some of these are large projects, some of these get delayed for whatever reason. We did also notice in the staff report, and I think it's important to note, that a number of these projects are already funded and already started construction. And there's a couple reasons why that may be the case. Some of these are large projects that were reviewed and approved by council years ago. And given the scale of the project or the timing or the funding, they haven't been implemented until recently. And these are projects that the commission has not previously looked at for consistency. And in part because the planning commission hasn't in the past been reviewing for consistency. It's only been for the last 2 previous fiscal years. So now these projects are on the CIP and we're asking that you take a look at these, although they're already funded. Other projects may have occurred, for instance, because the construction of the project was approved for one aspect of it previously, and as part of the repair or the construction or rebuild of some facility, they found that there's other aspects that need to be addressed. So if they have, for instance, a sewer treatment plant and they're replacing a part and they find that other parts are worn, they may include that in the following year. So you've in fact reviewed the project, if you will, but under the emergency issues or the funding, the need for doing the repairs, they funded it, pre-funded it, and put it on the capital improvement project for this year. So, and there's a few other reasons that were identified in the staff report of why it is that some of these projects may have already been started, even though consistency hasn't been found. Happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Eastman. So just to be clear, the commission is tasked with evaluating if there's consistency against the general plan, not fiscal determination on the item itself.
That's correct. Even though it is part of the budget, the issue here is not how much it costs. It is really an issue of whether or not it's consistent with what the general plan states. And the general plan is fundamentally, the general plan is a physical long-term plan, a physical build-out of the city in the long term.
Okay, so prior to opening public comment, we'll go to our fellow commissioners for any questions of staff on this item.
The first question I had, you hinted at it a little bit or provided some context, but about items that maybe have already started, construction or have been funded. Like for example, there was I noticed one of the new items was the McKinley grade separation. And so, I don't know if you can explain a little more why that would be included in this year's. When
that's a great example of a project that has, to do a grade separation of that scale, you're looking at years in advance of trying to put together the federal funding, the state funding, and what have you, and going through the process of maybe some community outreach and some design work and other things. So this planning commission has only been reviewing for consistency the CIP for the last 2 years. In fact, some cities don't do it, even though the state law says that they should. Some cities, like charter cities, weren't required to do it until recently, I believe, like a number of years ago. So from the city's perspective, some of these projects like McKinley grade separation, to our knowledge, have not been before the Planning Commission for a consistency review. That being said, I would have to go back and look at the project itself to see whether or not it was reviewed against the general plan at any point, because we do prepare staff reports, and typically in those staff reports, even to council, there is some discussion about the general plan and things of that nature. So the city council would be reviewing it, potentially would have reviewed it for consistency, but the city council is the city council, though not the planning commission. The state law says the planning commission shall determine consistency.
Okay, yeah, and because the other item that really caught my attention as far as being a project that's, well, not even started, but completed multiple years ago was the Foothill Parkway extension. So that was one of the things I didn't understand, why that's even included in the capital improvement program if the project is
Yeah,
completed.
I have to look at that project description. My recollection out of all of these projects is it was a widening of the Foothill extension. It wasn't the construction of the Foothill extension itself. And so why that wasn't widened previously, I couldn't tell you. We can always get that information, bring it back to you if it matters. The issue here is that, the widening of the Foothill Parkway is in the general plan. It's identified as a major road. So clearly widening it to an ultimate right-of-way is going to be consistent with the general plan, and that is within the purview of what, or the intent of what the widening is. Why it's in here now and why it wasn't done previously, I couldn't tell you. We do have segments throughout the city that we do widenings when the funding becomes available, when development along the properties becomes available. If an intersection is going to be re-signalized and lanes added, we might do some widening of a street. There's always circumstances that bring forward segments of different streets.
So they might still be doing like a small bit of that project that didn't get taken care of before, and that's
Yeah, I don't have the details of why that's on today. We can always look into that if you would like, but yeah, it's definitely in the CIP.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, the process by which items end up on this. So is it staff is starting with basically everything that has money allocated to it for capital improvements in the coming budget, and then staff compiles this chart, if you will?
Yeah, so the CIP program has evolved. I will say that recently this year, the city management office has put forward better procedures and processes for categorizing, defining, and determining CIP programs and what should be and shouldn't be, and prioritizing them. So that is a new effort being done by the city manager's office and the finance department, and was part of the consideration when the council did their workshop. That being said, we also passed a tax measure a number of years ago, and that tax measure has provided additional funding for some of these projects and to bring them about. And generally speaking, I think funding on a state level and infrastructure funding from the state still is still being maintained at a pretty high level. So there's funding available from the state for some projects like this. So every year we do consider what is to be funded for the next year. The CIP program in many cities is a 5-year program. In fact, you're only required to review annually for the next coming year. I believe we're moving to a 10-year CIP program, in fact, to look at what we want to construct over the next 10 years and prioritizing them. But it is not a stagnant program. It does change. It does get reconsidered based on priorities.
All right, thank you for that information.
I have several questions on some of the projects on there. The first one had to do with the airport facilities improvement. Aren't we leasing land that the airport sits on from the Corps of Engineers?
Yeah, that is lease land.
And when does that lease expire?
I used to know last year. I don't remember this year when that expires. I would have to look that up to find out when that lease date
Still
is.
have a
but
considerable amount of time out there, or is it relatively short term?
It's all relevant. We have a couple years, I think, still on it, easily. At the end of the day, I think the improvements that are being looked at are for public safety purposes and for flight safety. And I think that the city is not looking at doing any significant expansion of the airport at this time. It's really more of a maintenance and upkeep.
Okay. And then in regards to the Corona Innovation Center, is there any ideas where they're exploring to put this facility?
No, I don't have any information on where that is. I think in the description, they had identified that that was a location to be determined.
Yeah, I just didn't know what kind of zone they were looking at, if it would be in an existing, commercial zone or what. So, the Dominguez Ranch slope improvements, it states that slope repair engineering design services. So repair implies that there's current damage, or is this just mitigation?
So I didn't realize that our capital improvement project manager is here. So he actually can probably answer maybe some of these questions a little bit more than I can.
Okay.
I don't know, Kenny, if you have any thoughts you want to add on any of the previous questions or this one.
Sure. Good evening, Planning Commission. I'm Kenny Nguyen from CIP Capital Improvement Program. So answer a few questions like about the foothill. Why is it still on there? Because actually it's the requirement for the mitigation. So once the project is complete, we still have to do some mitigation like landscape and irrigation and stuff for a certain amount of years. In this case, will be 5 years. So another 5 more years that we have to mitigate that. And relate to the airport facility is actually the lease will be expired around 2037. And then the other question about the slope repair is actually right now is kind of like there's some erosion issue that we kind of noticed. So in the past, in like 2 years ago, we start like design, and then right now we're doing the construction to make sure that the slope doesn't fail and then kind of like cause some additional damage to those homes over there.
Okay. And then there was another one. Okay, in regards to the Butterfield Drive Road relocation, I know this is all part of the Alcoa Dike project, which I realize isn't it an Army Corps of Engineer project? So some of our CIP budget is going towards this pavement rehab. And in the description, it says the extent of pavement rehabilitation repair will include approximately 33,500 square feet of existing pavement. The scope of work to be determined by the consulting engineer firm contracted to prepare the design. Is that consulting engineering firm going to be hired by the city or the Corps?
Actually, the Stantec, the consultant for this project, is hired by the Orange County Flood.
Okay.
So they already identified the payment because we had to realign Butterfield Road. So that's why that's additional payment that they mentioned in the report. And they already are actually doing construction right now for that realignment of the Butterfield Road.
Okay, so the design isn't in the city of Corona scope.
Yes.
Okay. And I think that's it, all the questions I had.
My fellow commissioners asked several questions I had, but Mr. Eastman, could you go back, excuse me. You had stated that the CIP program was potentially going to move to a 5 or 10 year cadence?
Yeah, I'd have to, it's, the meeting was in April 13th of this year. And my brain doesn't last that long anymore. So I'd have to go back and watch the workshop to remember what the change was. But Kenny, I think Kenny was there at the meeting. He could probably answer that. I think he even presented.
Yes. So I present at the April 13th workshop meeting. As part of the revamp, we have moved toward the 10-year CIP program.
Great. So with that, then going forward, the Planning Commission would have a full 10-year cycle before them, but we'll be weighing in on just those new ones that are added for the next cycle. Is that?
Yeah, so the Planning Commission will do this every year. We'll take a look at the projects that will be constructed in the subsequent fiscal year, And that's because that's the wording of the state law. Some cities actually do a 2-year capital improvement project, and they come back and review it every 2 years, which, and they do some mid-year adjustments, if you will, or annual adjustments, but they don't change the program per se. Even in those circumstances, the Planning Commission would still need to review it every year pursuant to the state law.
Okay. And then is there a minimum dollar threshold for a capital item before it has to be added to this? And if so, what is that?
So the minimum funding is $50,000 to become a CIP project. If not, it will be either like maintenance or like purchase.
Or just operations then?
Correct.
Yeah, it's interesting, maybe just helpful for the commission in our future endeavors on this. Although we don't fiscally approve, I guess, the financials on it, it may be helpful to at least know the range, because it appears like there's some items that are probably $50,000, and there's probably several on here that are in the tens of millions. So it might just be, since we are being tasked with reviewing it, understanding that it's just for the general plan, it would be comfortable to know what the cost of that is. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, I think moving forward for next year, we discuss this every year with finance about how we can put this project together a little bit better for the Planning Commission's purposes. The challenge we have is, while there is a program that gets discussed in a workshop earlier in the year, it doesn't really get whittled down until, a couple months before the council's going to approve it, which gives us very little time to take, in this case, 164 projects, go through them, figure out which ones were last year's, which ones are current, which ones were last year's that were changed enough to really require more consistency review again. And then go back to the general plan and try to fit it, the project with the special criteria, the goals, and the policies. So we do rush to get this done every year. It's not difficult. It's just a lot of work, a lot of formatting, and a lot of, scrolling through pages. So I think that's a good point. We'll take that under advisement, and maybe that's something we can factor into the table next year.
Those were my questions. Any follow-up questions from Commission?
I have a couple, maybe directed more from Mr. Nguyen, but Commissioner Sherman asked about the airport and then the lease. Is that land leased from the Army Corps of Engineers, or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Just wanted to clarify that. And then are you able to talk a little bit about the old police building, the demolition? Is that building still in use currently as part of the Civic Center, or is that part sort of blocked off and not in use?
I had to double check, but at this point, we are just, I don't believe there's any tenant in there. So we already designed to kind of like, to demo that, and then we will kind of have a follow-up plan to what to do with that location.
Yeah, I think it has very limited use right now by the city. I think that there is some use of it, but it's isolated. It also is a security building, a building with a lot of security, being a police department, so it doesn't really lend itself well for other tenants.
And then the other item I was curious about was the fire station rebuild. Is that, what's the status of that? Is that underway, or is that, is there a timetable for that?
Yeah, so currently we already select a design consultant when we kind of like still take a look at different site to purchase for that fire station, the new fire station. But so far we had not been able to purchase any parcel for that. So one of the options was to rebuild at the current location.
So still site selection is where that one's
Correct.
at right now?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, if no further questions, we'll go ahead and open this item up for public comment. Ms. Capilla, did we receive any speaker cards or written comments from the public?
No, Chair, we did not.
All right, so we'll go ahead and close public comment, bring it back to the commission for any final comments or motion. My only comment, I think, Mr. Eastman, it is interesting to be tasked with 164 items with just a short amount of time, and I understand why the request is there, but in the future, it would be helpful to have some added tools just so we can understand why those decisions were made on the general plan goals. I appreciate the hard work that staff has done to classify each of these items into a general plan goal. And I understand why you had to do that and the timepiece, but these are monetary items. And, I don't think we ever want to have to rush through something that's monetary. So that would be my only comment.
Sure, these projects do affect the future of the city, and they all are important projects in one way or another, regardless of the cost, frankly. So yeah, we'll see what we can do moving forward next year, and see if we can maybe organize it a little bit better for the planning commissions.
Yeah, and maybe even a planning commission workshop like we've had on the housing initiative.
Yeah,
Since this is fiscal responsibility, maybe that's a process that
absolutely.
you consider.
And I'll say thanks again also to staff for all of this. This is my third time now seeing one of these, and each year I'm overwhelmed by how much there is, but also overwhelmed by how much good information is in there. And I think the chair's comments about maybe some other context, without adding more work to staff, but it would be useful, I think, in some aspects. But I really do appreciate this. The goals that are tied to it really kind of makes it easy for us to, think through and get through this. And with that, I will make a motion for the commission to approve.
And do we have a second on that?
I'll second.
All right, we have a second by Commissioner Sherman. Please vote. And the motion for GPCD 2023-0001 passes. Our next public item, public hearings are items that have been publicly advertised for review and consideration by the Planning and Housing Commission. This item is TTM 36864, a tentative tract map application to subdivide 2.09 acres into 7 lots for residential purposes and 1 lettered lot for street dedication purpose, located on the south side of Corona Avenue and west of Interstate 15 in the R1 7.2 zone. That's single-family residential, 7,200 square foot minimum lot size. The applicant tonight is Fathi Manazra. Ms. Choi, our associate planner, will present this item. Ms. Choi, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members of the Commission. I'm happy to present to you tonight the tentative tract map 36864. It is a request to subdivide a currently vacant lot. The lot is 2.09 acre, and the applicant is requesting to divide the lot into 7 detached single-family lots and 1 ladder lot for the purpose of creating a new street to access the development. As you can see on the screen in front of you, that the site is just south, is on the south side of Corona Avenue, is west of the Interstate 15. Across from the project site, the north side of Corona Avenue is a property that is zone R3. You can see the blue square on the map there. That property has been permitted has been entitled for 60 residential condominium that is currently under plan check by the city. Below that, you will see some vegetation, and that property is owned by the Riverside Flood Control District. And further down, there is a school. And coming back across the street to the north side of the property, there are residential development existing, zoned R1 7.2, that are adjacent to the proposed site. And the site is also zoned R1 7.2 with a minimum lot size requirement of 7,200 square feet. The general plan allowed the site to be developed up to 3 to 6 dwelling unit per acre. For reference, the project is proposing a 3.4 dwelling unit per acre density, which is within the density range allowed by the general plan. I will quickly touch up on prior approval at this location. If, just for context, the site has been vacant for a number of years, and some commissioner may find this site to be a familiar location. The two maps had came before the Planning Commission and City Council before, and that was in February of 2006, an application to subdivide the site for 6 lots, along with a variance request for lot depth of 2 lots. That was approved. And additionally, in September 2017, the Planning Commission and City Council also approved a 6-lot subdivision at this location. Unfortunately, both lots did not get recorded prior to the 2 years time limit, so both maps did expire, and that is the reason why the applicant is before you tonight requesting for your support on this project. The project before us tonight, again, is a 7-lot subdivision for single-family residence. The applicant indicated to staff that his intention is to come back to the Planning Commission at a future date for precise plan review and approval, and at which time the applicant will have the architectural study and floor plans and landscaping plans for the commission to review. Tonight, we're purely looking at the lot size after subdivision. And as you can see that the lots are arranged from north to south, that's correct. And you see lot 1 closest to Corona Avenue, going down to the south, and you get to the very end of the cul-de-sac, which is lot 7. The project will be accessed from Corona Avenue along the south side. The applicant will be creating a new cul-de-sac that is approximately 555 feet long. The cul-de-sac will be using a modified street design that's been reviewed and supported by the Development Services Division and also the Fire Department as well. In front of you is a section view of the street. The future street or cul-de-sac will have 42.5 feet in width. Along on the right-hand side of the screen, you see that there is a little red arrow pointing that area on the west side of the cul-de-sac. The fire department has requested that this portion of the cul-de-sac should not be allowed for parking. So along this portion, the west portion of the cul-de-sac, no parking will be allowed. And this is to ensure that the fire truck will have adequate access to go into the cul-de-sac for, should they need to, under certain circumstances. Provided for your reference is a conceptual fencing and wall plan. And again, as mentioned earlier, that the project in terms of landscaping and siting, architectural design, projects, fencing and wall will come back to the Planning Commission under the precise plan for the 7 single-family residential development. At this time, the applicant is proposing wrought iron fencing along the east and the west property track boundary lines of the project. Along the back, at the very end of the cul-de-sac behind lot 7, he is proposing a solid 6-foot-high decorative block wall. And adjacent to Corona Avenue, he is proposing a 6-foot-high block wall as well. And you can see that below, at the beginning of the cul-de-sac's entrance, there is a corner cutoff. So any planting material or wall or fencing material will have to be reduced to no higher than 30 inches in order to ensure that pedestrian and driver will have clear visual clearance as to oncoming traffic and pedestrian along the sidewalk as well. With this, I will conclude my presentation. At this time, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission adopt the mitigated negative declaration and the mitigated monitoring plans for tentative track map 36864 and recommend approval to the City Council based on the finding within the staff report. Thank you. I'm available for question.
Thank you, Ms. Choi. Before we move to public comment, I'd like to open to our fellow commissioners for questions for staff.
No question for staff, more for the applicant.
I do have one staff question before we move to that. Often brought before the commission, and maybe Mr. Eastman, this might be directed at you, sometimes we'll see a TTM by itself. Other times we'll see a precise plan presented with that, as well as other particular land use changes. My question is there a standard process that should be followed, or is it acceptable? Can any step be followed? I mean, we know based upon the presentation that a precise plan is forthcoming. Is there any reason why we don't have both before us?
Yeah, I mean, we can't force an applicant to submit an application. He's not required to submit them concurrently. It does just create a longer process, if you will. Technically speaking, you can subdivide land, and if you want to subdivide it and sell parcels individually, you're entitled to do that. Most people who do subdivisions of this nature, this design aspect, if you will, where they're individual lots on a street of this scale, will develop or sell the property to someone who will develop all the properties at once for efficiency and just economics, rather than trying to sell each property individually. We do see larger subdivisions where they're larger properties. We're more likely to have custom homes where you may see the lots sold individually after the streets are developed and built out.
Great, thank you. Any other staff questions?
I do. I had to find where it was. So, my question is related to the environmental assessment, because I noticed in the staff report it mentioned that there was potentially significant effects on the environment, but then the applicant has agreed to revise the project to address that, and then that would be reflected in the conditions of approval. But I wasn't quite clear what in the conditions of approval pointed toward, these revisions. So I don't know if I'm understanding it correctly, or if you can provide some more detail, please.
Sure. Thank you for the question. In terms of condition of approval, the condition of approval list is provided in Exhibit 3 attached to the staff report. And one of the condition mandate that the applicant must comply with the mitigated monitoring plans, which is provided at the very end of the environmental document, which is exhibit number 6. The mitigation monitoring plans list by category, if you will, of environmental concern, and it essentially provide the required actions by the applicant and the parties that needs to confirm those actions are done, and at what time these actions needs to be done in order to avoid significant impact from the project.
To answer your question, there's a mitigation monitoring program, and the applicant will need to comply with those mitigation measures as part of his project. I think from a CEQA kind of process, when we have a project that comes in and we've identified potential significant impacts, An applicant has the choice to revise their project to address what those impacts might be. They could redesign it, they could do some other things of that nature, or the project can be conditioned so that, and it could be fuel modification, it could be sound walls, it could be any of those type of environmental things that get constructed if the project's approved. So many times does it make more sense to move the project forward with conditions of doing something? Or just from a pragmatic standpoint, does it make more sense just to revise the project and incorporate the design changes to address what those significant impacts could be? In this particular case, we do have a mitigation monitoring program that the applicant and the city will have to implement should the project be approved.
And so is that monitoring program in Exhibit 3? Is it one of those, dozens of?
Yeah.
I read through all of them, and I was trying to figure out which was related to the revised project or mitigation, so that I wasn't clear about that.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's a specific design revision that was done to the project as, prior to the completion of the mitigation monitoring program or the initial study. You will see in the initial study itself that it will have mitigation measures identified for each one of the categories. So I happen to be on a page here that talks about transportation and traffic, and that doesn't have a mitigation measure. Here we go. Biology, which is page 12. I think it starts on page 11 of the initial checklist. It's 67 of the staff report. And as you go through at the bottom of it, it says mitigation measures MM7-A. And so this is prior to issuance of grading permits, the applicant shall submit a pre-construction notification to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Clean Waters Act, et cetera, et cetera. So it has mitigation measures to ensure compliance. We take all those mitigation measures that are identified in the initial study, which also come from the supporting documents, the biological report, the traffic study, et cetera. We take all of those and put those into a format called the mitigation monitoring program. And that's what we can refer back to with all the who does what, when it gets done, is it done before issuance of grading permits, is it done, at what point? So I'm trying to scroll down here to see if the mitigation monitoring program's attached, yeah. So in my online screen, it's PDF page 82 of the agenda packet. I don't know if you have the packet open or not. Or it's, yeah. So it starts there with the mitigation monitoring and reporting program.
So, because that is the justification that we're being asked to use to approve the tentative track map, is saying that this project looks like it may potentially have a significant effect, but the applicant is saying he will mitigate.
Yeah, so what we're saying is that the project has the potential to have a significant effect, but through the mitigation measures that are applied, the project will not. And sometimes it's an issue of, has the project been reviewed by the Army Corps of Engineers? As MM7-1 is, prior to issuance of grading permits, the project applicant shall submit a pre-construction notification to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Clean Water Act 404 permit. That's a procedural step, and there's no way that we could get clarification through that procedural step until the project's approved. So, and until the Army Corps has reviewed that for compliance, we don't know if there's a significant impact based on the Army Corps' findings, if that makes sense. So, and then through that permit process, if they find that there's a certain circumstance, then per the permit, then they would condition that appropriately. So those are the type of things that, to a certain extent, there is a process to go through. There are issues to be considered. Under noise, prior to issuance of building permits, the residential structures, the applicant's plans, and shall demonstrate that all the windows and glazing doors have a minimum sound transmission class rating of STC 28. We don't have construction plans for the project, so, we condition it to ensure that it meets the noise criteria. And so that's why we have that condition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, and I was just, it makes sense, but it also seems a little bit like we're, getting ahead of ourselves, but I understand what you're saying, and because the applicant did not want to wait, I guess, on the subdivision until the precise plan was finished, right?
Yeah, but even if they wanted to submit design, the architectural review aspects, the precise plan for the buildings, we still wouldn't know, for instance, the level of sound attenuation for the windows, because that's really addressed through the building permit process. And that's relevant in this particular location because of the adjacency to the freeway, right? Nighttime noise, freeway, what have you. We want to be sure to address that potential impact that could occur from those type of noise issues. So that's why we condition this project specifically for that condition, and we have others that are listed.
Okay, I think I'm good with questions for staff at this point.
I have one last question that came up. Regarding the fire access lane, you showed an exhibit for us, Ms. Choi. I don't know if you could bring that up, please. Is this, thank you, that's it. Is this an exceptional item? Have we done this in the city before? Is this unique to this location? I'm just curious about that fact.
Typically, the modified standard for the street, this is called Modified Standard 111, and this standard is typically reserved for private street. Is that correct, Chris? If you can chime in.
I believe it's a modified public street standard, and this is a unique situation.
So we don't have a lot of these situations within the city.
That's correct.
Yeah, keep in mind that in this particular case, you have a single loaded street, right? You don't have development on both sides of the street. Sure. So limiting parking on one side is basically you're limiting parking where there would be houses if it was a double loaded street.
Right.
So the parking basically equates out to the same, right? You meet the standards for street widths. And then, of course, we'll have it striped to ensure that it maintains the fire department access requirements.
Right, so it's red striped full length. Okay. Those are my questions.
I have one more then. So this was, I learned something new about our city, I guess, when reading the staff report, because it has to do with the 555-foot long cul-de-sac, and it said that was approved by the city's Board of Zoning Adjustment. Can you inform us a little more about that board?
Sure. So we have various levels of administrative review. We have a zoning administrator. I sit as the zoning administrator, so I review certain types of projects as the zoning administrator. I also sit on the Board of Zoning Adjustments with the building official and the Director of Public Works. And so it's the Director of Planning, so Joanne has delegated that authority to the planning manager. And then the Director of Public Works, who often delegates that authority to the traffic engineer if it's a traffic issue, or Kenny, our capital improvement project, he's the Assistant City Engineer. So there is a body, it's an administrative body that reviews these projects based on practical standards and professional experience.
And in this case, it's a three-person.
It's a three-person board. All three members need to sit. There's no to have a quorum. All three need to be there. You can't have two out of the three. It's in the zoning code, the municipal code. It identifies certain roles, certain things that the BZA does, and it also includes things like code interpretations, things like that, code enforcement. Liens, things of that nature. It's just another administrative process.
Yeah, thanks for filling us in on that.
We'll go ahead and move for public comment. So I'm going to go ahead and open public comment. I do have 2 speaker cards here. Ms. Capia, any other cards besides these 2?
No, Chair, that is all.
Okay, I understand we have our applicant here, Mr. Fadi Manazara and Sam Akbarpour. There we go. You're welcome to come up. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Sam Akbarpour with SEC Engineers at 400 South Ramona, Suite 202. I'm the engineer on the project, and I'm here to answer any question you may have. You guys brought up the street section. I just want to mention it really. The street has standard 36 feet, like any other standard street. The only reason it's modified because one side of it, there is an easement and there is no parkway. The curve face is standard of any other cul-de-sac width.
Comments from commissioners?
I did
Questions, I'm sorry.
I did have a question in relation to the September 2017 approval of the tentative track map. Was that left to expire so that you could redesign
No, it
the?
just happened due to COVID. Actually, I was not the engineer at the time. I'm the engineer on this new one. And, well, maybe good thing happened. No, during COVID, nothing. Nobody else could do anything. And then also, since then, the floodway and firm this area used to be by the adjacent property is being removed, and then new firm map is now eliminated the floodplain from this area.
The other question I had was in regards to the site fencing. I noticed that the back portion of these houses will just be wrought iron. Is that going to be enough as far as noise mitigation since the freeway is right there?
Well, actually, the freeway is about 30 feet higher and the landscape and the sound wall, so
That's all I had at the moment.
yeah.
Mr. Woody? I had a similar question regarding the previous approvals. So I think you've explained that. If I understand, it was 2 things: COVID, and then more importantly,
yes.
you probably learned that the adjacent development would be capturing the storm use.
No, the adjacent project recently, they just processed the FEMA removal and floodway. That's why we could come up with the 7 lots. Otherwise, we had to make it 6 lots.
Okay. And I guess as a follow-up question that I had earlier, you've opted just to submit a tentative track map request tonight and not including a precise plan at this point. Is there any specific reason for that?
You know, actually, it's interesting you brought that up because this is really first time. I've been to many planning commission. Actually, I used to work for the city here 35 years ago, so but for your information. Usually, really, like a builder owners, he wants to develop the lot, and then he has the option to sell individual lot. So that's why, you know, they don't want to come with a precise plan now. So as a matter of fact, he is a contractor. In this case, he wants to build it. We're going to come back with a precise plan. Otherwise, he has an option to finish the pad and sell individual lot.
So at this point in the process, that determination hasn't been made, is that?
Well, usually, really, since it's going to take time, you know, by the time really does improvement, infrastructures, the pad, everything, then they have few months to get the architectural, color rendering, precise plan ready to come back. Okay. That's what we usually do.
Any further? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to close public comment, and I'll bring it back to the commission for any further comments.
I would point sorry, there was a question about the wall facing or the fencing facing the freeway. In the staff report, we do identify that we are recommending a 6-foot solid decorative block on the east property line due to the Interstate 15.
Oh, so that graphic showing wrought iron would be block wall.
Yeah, I'm seeing it in the language of the staff report. I'd have to look through the conditions to see if it was added as a condition. But under fences and walls, page 5 of 8 in the staff report, it says due to the remaining open space between the project's east boundary line and the Interstate 15 sound barrier wall, staff recommends a 6-foot high solid decorative block wall along the east property line. So I just wanted to add that in response to your question.
Thank you. Commissioner comments?
I'm good.
The adjacent property with the Tuscany Villa project, is that, has that already been approved? I mean, I don't remember us reviewing it. Where is that in the process?
I believe that was approved before I was with the city. I think it's been a while. I think they had some environmental issues they had to address and some other things, but my understanding it's currently in plan check.
All right, thank you.
And I'd ask Eva, I'm not seeing under the planning section that east block wall as a condition of approval. I know it's in the staff report, but.
Correct. If I may address that. Under the condition of approvals, staff provided condition number 4 under the planning section is simply dictate that all retaining wall exposed to the street shall be constructed of decorative masonry block. However, staff in the staff report is recommending that a solid block wall be provided along the west,
East,
the east. I'm so
east
sorry.
facing the freeway.
The east side, abutting the freeway, for the very reason that the project will have to come back to the commission under the precise plan review, and at that time, we will conclusively provide an appropriate condition of approval.
Have we discussed that with the applicant? I don't want to throw something at the applicant last minute here.
Yeah, definitely. Rather,
Along the east wall.
yeah, along the freeway. Yes, definitely. Really, we don't want to really. First of all, no public is going to see from the freeway. You know, it's 40-foot slopes, and this is the rear of the lots. They want to see through something. You know, at least a wrought iron something, and it's going to be a huge burden of the cost of really putting. Actually, we're going to have a small retaining wall there too, and then we put another 6-foot garden wall on top of that. Some homeowner is going to look at 9-foot high. So that's why we want a wrought iron against the freeway on the bottom of the slope, which is east side of the project. Okay, yes, sir.
Thank you. I just wasn't sure if we had discussed it with you or not because I wasn't seeing it as a condition. So, you know, at this point, staff has included that in our staff report in the verbiage. We haven't added it as a condition. The commission could add it as a condition if that's something the commission wants to do, or you can defer it to when a precise plan is prepared at a later date, should the applicant come back with developing more than 4 of the lots.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that, so.
Thank you, Mr. Eastman. My only comment would be, we often hear about how long it takes for things to move through the city and cities and city of Corona as well. I know it's the purview of the applicant to just do a tentative track map, but I would challenge in the future, either you or any future developer, it would make sense to do them all together because often we're talking about the same subject matter, and I suspect we'll be repeating ourselves here in the future, hopefully, should this matter get approved when we review a precise plan.
I guess I have a question for Mr. Eastman now that something he just touched on about the idea of the developing 4 of the lots, then that sort of requires a precise plan. But at this point, since we're subdividing the lots, and what happens if he only develops 2 or 3 of them, and how does that potentially tie into this discussion we were having about the wall?
Yeah, so the property owner is entitled to submit, plans to the city for construction of units. If I believe it's more than 4, 5 or more, I'm going off of memory, I'd have to actually review the code. I always say, try not to remember the code because you might remember it wrong. But I would look it up. I believe it's 5 or more, 4. So 4 or more, they would have to submit a precise plan. Okay, so if they wanted to develop, I could have sworn it was more than 4, but that being said, at a certain point, there's a threshold where they would have to come back before you with a precise plan. If they wanted to do less and they wanted to submit plans to develop 2 of the lots and leave the others remain vacant, then they could submit that to the building division.
And so, yeah, I mean, the wording actually in the staff report is more than 4, but, which would then suggest 5. But, so then, what would the situation be if they only did try to develop a few of them? You know, since staff is recommending one thing and with this wall, and we're talking about addressing it later with the precise plan.
May I answer that? Usually, part of this subdivision, they're gonna go do the improvement, utilities, street, rough grading pad, finished blue top, and the perimeter wall. This is typical for every subdivision. Then they go to precise plan, developing lot by lot. So by the time he's done, because he has a bond, he has to be released. So he has to finish all of those: the street, light, sewer, water, sidewalk, the perimeter, and the fencing is all going to be done.
So then I would ask my fellow commissioners, does that sound like we need to reach some sort of consensus on the perimeter wall tonight?
Honestly, the east side wall, it makes sense to be wrought iron because it's almost 40 to 30 foot. It varies, of course, freeway and then a sound wall. So people are looking at that slope only. No other public view is from anywhere for that east side wall, except really where the corona, maybe the corner cut, That's it.
So your plan is to have a retaining wall, right, sort of against that slope first?
It's not
and then-
retaining. It's probably retaining because of the grade differential. We may have a foot or 2, at most 3 foot retaining wall. Then on top of it, we're gonna have a garden, a wrought iron, and then behind that is gonna have a concrete ditch to convey the drainage from the slope and bring it up to the corona.
Was there, Mr. Eastman, or Ms. Choi, was there any specific reason that the conversation came up about potentially moving from wrought iron to CMU block? Because I just want to be careful, because I think you thought it was being added, but maybe it wasn't.
Yeah,
So I just
I-
want to bring some clarity to that before we go down that rabbit
Yeah,
hole, if you will.
I hadn't had any conversations with the applicant regarding that, which is why I asked the applicant to come up and see if he had a preference. I would defer whether or not there was a particular issue that was discussed, whether it was with the senior planner or who, as to the purpose of going to a concrete block. But I mean, I have my own opinions of why I prefer it, but I don't know what was discussed.
Sure. The idea of providing a solid block wall along the east property line will provide additional noise buffering mitigation to the residents in the backyard. And additionally, behind to the east of this property, the city does not anticipate any development at that location. It will simply be left vacant. And staff would feels that a solid block wall along the back of the future residents' property line will provide a more secure measures.
Well, so then, I guess what we had before, if is the recommendation from staff, was to provide a block wall. I typically will refer to staff if that's their recommendation. And if it's not in what we have before us, I think, Mr. Woody, you were kind of going down that path.
Yeah, and I would say we do have some standards for track development, fencing and walls, so they would still need to comply with that. So any block wall facing a street would need to be a solid masonry block wall, so that would address Corona Avenue. But there is no real street, if you will, on the east side. And then I did look up the code. Precise plans require that if it's 5 or more, approval of a precise plan is required for the following: single-family residential development of 5 or more parcels in a subdivision. So in theory, if they wanted to come back with 4 units and just build 4 units at this time, it doesn't meet the criteria for a precise plan. And so they would just need to meet the development standards in the code.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the chair that I would also defer to staff on the, you know, the wall. But, I mean, it sounds like staff's recommendation is at odds with the applicant on this.
Yeah, I would say this. When we have a sliver of land that's owned by Caltrans or another public entity, and even if it's privately owned, but it just sits vacant with maybe an absentee owner, the city tries hard to minimize issues that can occur with homeless or dropping of, you know, furniture, you know, trash, things of that nature, and then also maintenance. And so generally from the resident perspective, so to eliminate the number of calls for service and what have you, having a solid wall would be a more secure environment for the resident units being built. And so from a conservative perspective, I think staff would make that recommendation. You know, from my experience, when you have wrought iron opening up under those spaces, we actually get calls to service when they see people out there, and so maybe the things get addressed sooner than if somebody's just walking around dumping things or something, or living on the other side of a block wall. So, you know, our recommendation is to do a block wall. I think that that's a conservative approach, and generally speaking, what we would prefer to see. It's not something I think necessarily that we would die on at this point. But you have to imagine you're going to have residents that are going to be staring at a wrought iron fence onto a vacant lot that's probably going to stay vacant in a vacant slope. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, yeah, because I visited the site, and I think I think the security aspect of it, of keeping people from getting behind a wall or something, possibly could be addressed by having, you know, the wall along Corona Avenue, which has to be a solid masonry wall, maybe somehow having that connect to, you know, the Caltrans area where the overpass is and the freeway itself. I'm not really sure how that would work. But I also understand what, you know, the point that Mr. Eastman makes, which is valid, of if there is a wrought iron fence that nobody can get behind to maintain the sliver of land behind it, then that kind of creates an eyesore, I suppose, for the residents.
Do we have a motion that you'd like to bring forward? Or I can offer a motion.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what
Sure.
to think.
I would offer a condition of approval that says that the east fence line at city recommendation go to CMU, and that the rest of the development as presented be approved. That would be my motion.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
Can I say something, please?
I'll go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and open public comment. Mr. Manazara, yes.
Good afternoon. The site of this project does not apply to most of the conditions we talk about. The back of the lots has about 40 feet high Caltrans slope, which is maintained by Caltrans. The homeowners has nothing to do with maintaining any of the slopes. And plus, we had the sound wall, which is prevent any public from going to that area. This is the uniqueness of the project. And so I feel 6 foot high block wall at the back, it will make it like a prison. You know, I'm not going to live there. I'm going to invest and sell. But I feel as a homeowner, I would rather not to look to the back, and you have the slope, and you have weed, and you have flowers, and you have whatever. Looking at 6 foot machinery wall, Especially also, we have to deal with the drainage. What we proposed, 2 or 3 feet retaining wall with a ditch to carry all the water coming from Caltrans, not from our lots, just from Caltrans portion. And just to take care of it and take it to the proper channel, the wall will create a obstacle to do that. You know, when you have 6-foot wall, where you go with the drainage? How you deal with it? So what we propose to have the ditch in the top of the wall, wherever the ground, you know, we have to do it for positive drainage. And I feel the wall will not be wise to put it in the back there. That's my point.
You know, actually, I noticed you brought it up. Really, the only reason we designed that as a wrought iron to accept and convey the drainage from the slope. If you put a block wall there, it's going to create a dam. That's what it is. So it's almost 30, 40-foot slope. It's sheet flowing toward the property, and then we have a V-ditch. That's why we have the wrought iron to accept drainage and convey it forward.
In your statement you just made, then, does the water come down the hill and flow into the backyard?
No. We have from the slope comes to a ditch and then goes all the way toward Corona Avenue.
Whether it's wrought iron or CMU wouldn't make a difference if the drainage...
But if it's wrought iron, the water can go through. If it's block wall, it's going to block it. The water is going to stay there, going nowhere.
Logically, I don't think we need to do the wall in the back. Also, actually, there is one condition here, and I talked to Eva about it, about the west side of the road, the A Street. There is an existing walls from the neighbors because there is a 6-foot easement for utility, and if we put a wall there, and it's mentioned here, to put a wall, and will not, how you can do double walls at the property line.
Yeah, I think that's another condition that we have in there that's identified. And if I'm not mistaken, the west was really intended to be along Corona Avenue. I'm trying to look at the language here of the condition.
Yeah, but you're right at the bottom, yes.
Because of the angling of the lot, it doesn't run true east-west, right? So it is diagonal. So there may have been some miscommunication, but the condition, what he was just referring to is...
Which number?
Number 8.
Which is along the fire lane.
Provide a
that
decorative
we're talking
perimeter wall along the west track boundary line. And I believe if you look at the staff report, it does say a short retaining wall with a 6-foot high decorative block wall is proposed along the street side lot line, north perimeter in this particular case, of lot 1 adjacent to Corona Avenue.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then we have a 6-foot block wall on the they call it south property line, the rear of lot 7. So there's a confusion in the staff report writing, I think, as to the north, south, east, west. But as currently identified, and I'll let the applicant correct me, there was an agreement that on Corona Avenue, there would be a solid decorative block wall.
Yes.
And then at the back of the lot, adjacent to what is another property, there would be another block wall. That would be the back of 7. And so what staff is recommending in the staff report, but not currently a condition of approval, which is before you, is a solid block wall on, I'm going to say the east, running parallel with the freeway. I don't believe we're recommending a block wall on the actual west property line, because there is a 6-foot public utility easement there.
Could we possibly bring up the site plan? 'Cause I just want to make sure any ambiguity is clear so that we're weighing in on the right.
So the wall to the west, the decorative perimeter wall, how I'm reading that the condition 8 would be just sort of a short decorative wall so that it's, so that, I guess, presumably right next to the curb, that would be a fire lane painted red.
You're talking about lot 1 on the west side. So this lot, you can see there's a north arrow pointing to the west side. At the bottom it says north in little red, on bottom right corner of this image. So using that as a reference, north is to the left of the page. So in this particular case, there would be a short block wall on lot 1 adjacent to Corona Avenue. I believe it will be set back for line of sight issues and visibility
Yes.
At the corner, yes.
at the corner. And then if you look at the right side of this page, lot 7, there will be a block wall there adjacent to the other property. Eva, does your cursor work on the screen?
Yes, it does.
Does it show up on the exhibit? No,
No,
that's
it
all
is
right.
not, it's not my cursor.
The other exhibit, grading plan.
Yeah,
Would it help if I go to the fencing exhibit?
that'd be great if we have one.
Yeah, yeah.
There we go. Well, there you go. So the applicant is proposing a wrought iron, as you can see on what's referred to as the east and the west. Or at least I guess there's an
The west.
existing wrought iron on the west, correct? Or
The west, no.
no?
No, there is.
Because there is an existing wall from the neighbors.
Neighbors, on the other side of the 6
And they are
feet.
zigzagging, they are not uniform.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
anything we put on the west side will not be does not make sense.
Yeah. So I'm glad we're clarifying this today. I had thought that there was going to be a wrought iron fence or some kind of fencing, and maybe it was because of this exhibit. I don't think a fence or a wall is necessary on the west side, which is the street side at the bottom of this page. They still will need to post it, so there'll be some signs that will say no parking, and a red curb as well. But definitely on what's referred to here as the north and south, the short ends of the walls is being proposed. I think we're in agreement with that. So then the question becomes whether or not a wrought iron fence along the east, running parallel with Caltrans, is something that the commission would like to have done or not. Again, staff has recommended that in the staff report, the body of the staff report. It's really, it's not an adjacent property, it's a Caltrans property. It really is just more for security purposes. Like I said before, it's not something staff is really dying over to require it to be done. I don't think it was a recommendation from the police department or any other department, so.
So just to be clear, the wrought iron fencing at the bottom of our screen, you're saying is not required?
I don't believe it was proposed,
That would be omitted from this application?
nor are we recommending that.
Okay.
It is not required by the police or the fire departments. However, at this time, the only structure separating this development and the neighboring property to the west are the neighboring properties' block walls. And what we have in that place is behind those block wall, we have some power poles. If the applicant is to install wrought iron fencing next to the power pole, that will allow the public utility to access and maintain the power poles. And that is the reason why we don't want to see a solid block wall along the west.
Yeah, the applicant, my understanding is the applicant is not proposing the wrought iron on the west.
That's correct.
Are we recommending that there be a wrought iron on the west? Or is this an error?
Can I make a
That is
recommendation?
not an error.
Absolutely.
So maybe we can amend the motion that I put forth. It sounds like maybe staff and applicant, we need to true up some assumptions. And maybe the recommendation or on the motion would be a motion to approve the application presented with the understanding that the wrought iron fencing on the west of the screen and at the east of the screen, that those two items are reviewed by both staff and the applicant.
That's correct. We agree.
And yeah, I mean, because that also has me confused about that condition number 8 that says a decorative perimeter wall along the west boundary. So,
Yeah, because there's some ambiguity here, and, I mean, to me, it's not overly complex, but it should be correct. And if the city has a position that in a development like this, a CMU wall is appropriate abutting a freeway, then ultimately, if the city feels that that's appropriate, with this motion, I would state that that would, so required from staff, then it should be part of the motion.
Yeah, so
And we would leave that up to staff to make that ultimate determination. Otherwise, I would have to say that we would defer the application tonight and have it represented with whatever corrections need to be made, and I don't know if we need to go down that path. So that's
can work it out.
that's kind of my
yeah,
options.
I guess the question is here. So first of all, I do want to clarify, it's important that this is the right time to get this correct, because it appears that there is some difference in language that's being presented. And again, that is in part because I think you have an exhibit here that shows north to the left, right? But the actual site is kind of diagonal in terms of your cardinal directions. So I think there may have been some miscommunication on which is which side. In this particular image before you, west is along Corona Avenue. That would be a decorative block wall as shown here in this exhibit. The east would be the back of Lot 7 with a decorative block wall as shown as this exhibit. I think we're all in agreement that that would be constructed in that manner.
Yes, yes.
So then the question becomes what is referred to as the east and west in this exhibit, which is what's currently listed as wrought iron. Staff is more than happy to work with the applicant to identify what an appropriate fencing material is, should they not come forward with a precise plan in the future. If they come forward with a precise plan in the future, this issue would then be up to the Planning Commission for consideration. There are some technical reasons of why fencing along the west side, adjacent to the 6-foot public utility, needs some technical issues that need to be considered in terms of access for the utility, et cetera. The east side is, and from staff's perspective, which is running parallel with Caltrans, is less of a technical issue and more of a community security issue. And again, it really has to do with the fact that it's a narrow sloped Caltrans property. And from the perspective of what occurs there and the security of that space. At the end of the day, I don't know that there's any technical or, anything other than anecdotal kind of experience. So we're happy to work with the applicant to identify that and work with the applicant on it. Again, if the commission feels that there isn't a necessary need to put a block wall along the east property line parallel Caltrans, staff is more than happy with that. And if we need to go back to the police department and have a discussion with them as to their preference from a security and response as it relates to, encampments, or with our maintenance department that deals with picking up trash and debris, which probably wouldn't get pushed that far back on the lot, we're more than happy to work with staff to come up with some recommendations to pursue.
Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead and close public comment now, and we'll bring it back to the commission for any final discussion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would like, as I said before, I'm happy to defer to staff on the question of the wall, but yeah, I think Mr. Eastman's idea of maybe, revisiting with the police to make a better determination. I think it's not clear to me how much of that land will be behind the whatever wall ends up there. And, I don't know what Caltrans needs to do to maintain that. So, yeah, I mean, it sounded like the idea was to have a motion to approve it and leave certain details delegated to staff to decide later. Is that what you're suggesting, Chair?
Yeah, I think I would change my motion to say approving the application with a staff analysis with police department and fire input, and their recommendation to staff to then decide the proper approach for the east wall.
Well, at some point, we're gonna have to look at the precise plan, right? So-
Yeah, and
So we would have the ability to
I
kind
think-
of stop that. Should the
Should it
full
not-
development be presented in totality, that's correct. But if the parcels were sold off, I think to Mr. Woody's comment earlier, if we didn't make this part of the TTM, it's conceivable that this could be sold off in less than 4 parcels.
this could be a moot point anyway, because we may be moving forward with the precise plan in the future, and we'd
Right.
have done this review and analysis with police of the future, but
I would think staff could work it out, so that's why my motion would be, to me, it seems as if this is something that staff with the right input from other departments should be able to make a proper recommendation. So that's my motion.
staff understands your motion. Thank you.
Then I would second that motion.
Okay,
Chair.
Mr. Woody provides a second. If you could please vote on the item. And the motion passes. We'll move to our next item, written communications. Has the Planning and Housing Commission Secretary received any written communication from persons providing information or seeking action by the Planning and Housing Commission?
No, Chair, we have not.
Thank you, Ms. Capia. Mr. Eastman, any administrative reports for us this evening?
Yeah, I do want to touch on one thing, and I didn't want to send out an email to you without first giving you some heads up on it. As you know, we have been doing some remote meetings this year. We have had members Zooming into meetings and what have you. Prior to COVID and the emergency order from the state, commissions, councils, committees, boards required that the members attend in person at a physical location. Now, for larger entities, like for instance, the Southern California Association of Government, that is comprised of, I think 90, last I remember, it was 98 different jurisdictions. They have remote locations where members can go so they don't have to drive to downtown LA. But those are all locations that are posted on an agenda, and the public is invited to attend those locations and participate remotely from those meeting rooms or those boardrooms. When COVID hit, there was an executive order that the governor put in place that allowed for Zoom into meetings so you could participate from home. With COVID going away and the emergency orders being rescinded in February, it now requires that the members of the Planning Commission be here physically in this building. Although there was a law that was passed last year that allows for commissioners to participate under restricted conditions or criteria to participate remotely, but there's a procedure by doing it, and there's certain criteria by which they would need to meet. So there's 2 criteria. There's a just cause criteria and emergency circumstances. And so I will be sending an email to you outlining kind of that process and with an attachment from the League of California Cities on the new laws that are in place. And that has been in place since February 28th, essentially when the emergency orders were rescinded. We've just been slow to respond to it because I think it wasn't really promoted as well as it probably should have been, and that being what it is. It doesn't prohibit the city from doing more in terms of providing opportunities for the public to participate per Zoom, but the actual members of the commission will need to be here in the room. So I will be sending that email to you today. I don't expect you to have any comments or questions on it. If you do have any, feel free to respond to me. I'm more than happy to try to guide you through that.
Thank you, Mr. Eastman. Planning commissioners, any comments or reports this evening? I just would like to add, I understand we potentially have a fill on the open planning commissioner spot.
Potentially. Yeah, I don't have any details on the person. I don't know that it's 100%. My understanding is that the councilwoman has gone through the applications, made a selection, and has, I think, extended that invitation to that person. And we'll be making that appointment, I believe, at the next council meeting. I think it's June 7th, I think.
Sure, that should potentially resolve any issues with Zoom meeting attendance. And then I think at that time, we can also do our elections for chair and vice chair. I know that's been a topic of discussion, so we'll look for that potentially at the next meeting or the following one thereafter.
And our next meeting then is the 12th, is that right?
June 12th.
Okay.
Yep. All right, I'm adjourning tonight's meeting. Thank you for putting up with my cold. Have a good night.